In this episode, I will continue to wire the car, route the fuel line, and start buttoning up the oil lines in the car. What you see on the ground is the GPS sender. What I did is that I extended the cable. It's a 4-core cable that I needed, but what I found, I could just use standard networking cable, which has 8 cores in it, and just double up the cores. So you can see that now that it's quite a bit longer and it should fit the car very well. Okay, here is the bracket I made for the GPS sender, and that will go just under there. As you can see, just under there. Here I've mounted the GPS sender and run the wiring down the support. It will join the wiring loom that will go forward in the car together with the wiring for the fuel pump. Speaking of the fuel pump, we have it here, and as you can see in there, I've mounted the relay feeding the fuel pump, and there are 2 wires coming out, the signal wire and the wire from the battery. The wire from the battery will first will be fused, and I'll put in an inertia switch as well, just in case. Here I've started to wire in the fuel pump relay wires, as well as the GPS wires here. I've been binding that to the existing loom, and I'll follow the existing loom through the transmission tunnel all the way into the under cowling area. From the fuel pump line, I wired in a fuse and onto the main power line, and also into the signal wire I wired in the inertia switch. So this will have the effect that if I were in an accident, this inertia switch hopefully will switch off the fuel pump. I've just finished routing the wiring for the fuel pump. Now I'm routing the actual feed line to the engine. You can see here it runs through the transmission tunnel, but it is very, very loose, and it needs to be fixed. So I've drilled out a couple of rivets there and here, and on the inside I'll put riv nuts and a P-clamp there to hold the cable in, to hold the pipe in very firmly. Here we can see the fuel line running through. It needs to be supported before it goes to the carburetors. There's a chassis rail here, and I'll connect it to that. I don't know whether I should just zip tie it or try and figure out a more permanent fixture. And similarly, under this support bar above the gearbox, I'll try and support it under there. After a little bit of thought, I decided to use the bell housing bolts to mount P-clips onto and route the fuel line by the top of the gearbox next to the engine. It gives a very clean appearance, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Just want to show the routing of the fuel line. As you can see, I've got a P-clamp up the top there where I drilled out a rivet. I put in a riv nut, and I've used that riv nut as the base for a clamp. And as you go forward, you'll see that the fuel line is near the top of the transmission tunnel. There's another P-clamp on the side there. That effectively goes forward up until the engine bay, where the fuel line goes around the top of the bell housing. Looking from inside the car in the transmission tunnel, you can see where I drilled out a rivet, I inserted a riv nut, and I put the bolt in through the back to hold the P-clamp. This holds it nice and steady inside the transmission tunnel. Also, what you can see here again is the fuel line coming through. I tightened all the oil lines. I have to find out what this line, connection is for on the oil reservoir. I think that might be an oil filter housing. I just need to find out. And at the front of the car, you will see the scavenge pump inside there. All those lines have now been tightened. Okay, I've taken the bolts off this thing, opened it up and discovered this is the actual oil filter for the system. This is actually really quite neat and also allows me to prime the oil system by just throwing oil down there initially. Some of the other things that need to be addressed in the car is this line here. You can see it goes into an oil pressure sensor. It's in a T and the other side of the T is just open. I need to work out a way of actually connecting that directly or capping off the other end of that T. Similarly, with the alternator, the actual connector into the back of the alternator is missing. So in order to get the wiring in there, I will have to buy a plug that fits that.